thought he was my best friend, but he set me up to be stabbed. In one moment, my world shattered. This is my story. Nathan and Malik stood on the corner of a quiet street in North London. The evening was young, but the buzz of anticipation filled the air. Music from a nearby party spilled into the cool night, and Nathan felt the world at his feet. "Bro, this is the life," Nathan said, smiling as he took a sip from his bottle of Coke. "One more year, and we're out of here. Uni life, man." Malik gave him a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His attention kept darting to his phone, then back to the street. "Yo, what's up with you? You've been looking around like you're waiting for someone." Malik didn't answer. He stepped back into the shadows, pulling his hoodie tighter. "We gotta hit up that takeaway later." Nathan nudged him playfully. Malik forced a laugh. "Nah, man, just—" His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at the road again. "I gotta step away for a second. Wait here." Nathan frowned. Something felt off. He looked around. 3 hooded figures appeared across the street, walking with a quick, determined pace. "Bruv, what's going on?" One of them had a knife. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. "Malik!" Nathan shouted. But Malik didn't look up. Before Nathan could take another step, one of the figures lunged forward with lightning speed. The cold steel of the knife sank into his abdomen. He gasped. Blood stained his hoodie. The pain was excruciating. He tried to scream, but only a gurgling sound escaped his lips. Nathan collapsed. His breath came in short, painful gasps. "Malik!" he cried out, but the words barely left his mouth. Malik, his best friend, was gone. The last thing Nathan saw was the shadowy figures disappearing into the night. And then, darkness. Mrs. Brodie was drying her hands when the phone rang. She answered. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Brodie?" A voice, calm yet distant. "Yes, who is this?" A pause. "I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Your son, Nathan, he's been—" Her knees buckled. Her world turned black. Mrs. Brodie hadn't stopped praying since she'd gotten the call. The ambulance had rushed Nathan to the hospital, but the doctors weren't sure he was going to make it. When Mrs. Brodie arrived, she saw her son lying in the sterile white room. His face was pale, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. She collapsed beside him, clutching his hand, refusing to leave. "Please, Nathan, please come back to me." Her voice was raw, hoarse from crying. "I need you. You can't leave me, my baby." But for the next 3 months, Nathan was gone. His body remained in a coma, teetering on the brink of life and death. Malik sat in his bedroom, staring at his blood-stained hoodie. His hands trembled. His phone rang. "Rico." "Yo," Malik whispered, voice hoarse. "You good?" Rico's voice was sharp, uncaring. "Bruv, I didn't think. I mean, he's my boy. Was your boy," Rico corrected. "This is what it is, Malik. You in or you out?" Malik's throat tightened. "You in," Rico repeated, "or you out?" Malik hesitated, but he knew the truth. There was no way out. The police came to Mrs. Brodie's door 2 days later. "Do you know anyone who might want to hurt your son?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Nathan is a good boy. He has never been in trouble." But trouble had found him anyway. She visited his friends, she knocked on doors, she begged, but all she got was shrugged shoulders and downcast eyes. The streets had rules. No one snitched. Nathan's soul drifted in a realm of silence, a cold, empty void, but he wasn't alone. Darkness surrounded him, but in the distance he could see a figure. "Who are you?" Nathan asked, but no voice came out. He tried to move closer, but it was like he was tethered by an invisible force. The figure turned. It was his grandmother, a woman he had lost when he was just a child. "Grandma," he whispered, unable to touch her. "What's happening?" "Where am I?" She smiled gently, her eyes full of sorrow. "You're at a crossroads, Nathan." "I'm alive, aren't I?" he asked, looking down at his own body, still lying in the hospital bed. "No, my child, you are not fully alive. She reached for him, but there was something inhuman about her touch. "You have a choice," she said, her voice echoing in his mind. "You can stay, or you can return, but nothing will ever be the same if you return." Nathan felt a pull. His body was calling him back, but his heart was heavy with the weight of his decision. "I want to go back," he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. A month after Nathan's attack, Mrs. Brody sits in her dimly lit living room. The room is silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Then phone rings. It's an unknown number. She hesitates before answering. Mrs. Brody, tense, tired. "Hello?" Anonymous caller. "You want to know what happened to your son, don't you?" Malik knew. His best friend. Mrs. Brody, urgent, wary. "Who is this?" But the caller hung up. Mrs. Brody's blood runs cold. Her knees feel weak. The words hit her like a slap. The breath in her lungs vanishes. Mrs. Brody, staggering, shaking her head. "No, Malik would never..." Mrs. Brody closes her eyes, her mind racing. The memory of Malik standing at the hospital, his hands in his pockets, his eyes avoiding hers, the way he never truly answered her questions. The phone slips from her hands, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. Her breathing is shaky, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her eyes dart to the family portrait on the wall. A picture of Nathan and Malik from years ago, smiling, arms around each other, inseparable. Instead, she reaches for her black winter jacket and grabs her keys. She storms toward the door, her mind racing, the truth hanging in the air like a curse. She stormed through the streets, her heart pounding in her chest. She banged on the door of Malik's house with such force that it rattled on its hinges. "Malik! Open this door right now!" Malik's mother answered, her eyes wary. "Mrs. Brody, what's..." But Mrs. Brody shoved past her, storming inside. Malik stood in the hallway, frozen, his face going pale as he saw her. "You!" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You were supposed to be his brother. You set him up. You left him to die." Malik's hands trembled. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I swear, Mrs. Brody, I was scared. They forced me." "Scared!" She slapped him, her voice shaking. "You watched him bleed. You watched my son suffer. And you did nothing." Tears filled Malik's eyes. I hate myself for it every day. If I could go back." "But you can't." She cut him off, her voice cracking. "You can never undo what you did. And now, you will answer for it." Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. Blue lights flashed outside the windows. Mrs. Brody turned away from Malik as the police banged on the door. "Malik Khan, you are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder." Malik didn't resist as the officers grabbed his wrists and cuffed him. He hung his head in defeat. Mrs. Brody stood in the doorway, her breath unsteady as she watched them take him away. She had no sympathy left, only sorrow. As the door closed behind them, she whispered, "I hope every night, when you close your eyes, you see his face. I hope it haunts you." And with that, she walked away. Malik sat in the police station, hands clenched in his lap. "I want to talk," he said, voice barely above a whisper. He gave up Rico and the others. That same night, another set of officers stormed into various locations across the city. Rico and the others were dragged from their beds in the early hours of the morning, their wrists bound in cold steel. The streets that once protected them now watched in silence as they were taken away, one by one. Rico's face was blank, but his eyes were burning with hatred. "You're dead to me," Rico spat as saw Malik at the police station. Malik felt nothing. He was already dead inside. One day, Nathan's doctor shook his head. "I'm sorry, but his body is failing." Mrs. Brody dropped to her knees. No, please God, don't take my son, please." It was a long, silent 3 months for Mrs. Brody. She sat by his bedside day and night, praying for a miracle. Then, one night, something happened. Nathan's hand twitched. His chest rose higher with each breath. His eyes fluttered. And then, with a deep, painful groan, he opened them. "Mom!" Nathan whispered, his voice weak. "Mom!" Her face lit up with joy, but there was something else. Fear. "Nathan, you're back," she cried, taking his hand in hers. When Nathan awoke fully, his memories were fractured. The first thing he remembered was the pain of betrayal in his heart. And then nothing. Nathan's mother told him what had happened, that Malik had been a part of it. He had helped set him up, but now sentenced to 20 years in jail for accomplice, and the other boys 50 years for attempted murder. Months later, after recovering, Nathan finally visited Malik in prison. "Why, Malik?" Nathan's voice was raw with emotion. "Why did you betray me?" "I would have died," Malik's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to, I swear, Nathan. But Rico, he gave me no choice. I was scared." "You had a choice." Nathan slammed his fist on the table. Nathan stared at his former best friend, searching for any sign of the person he once trusted. "I came here today, not for you, but for myself. To find closure. I don't hate you, Malik. I forgive you." Malik nodded slowly, tears streaking down his face. "Thank you, man." Nathan stood up. "I hope one day you truly understand what you've done." Without another word, he walked away, leaving Malik to his fate. 2 years later, Nathan stood before a group of young kids at a school assembly. He had a new purpose now. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a warning. His scar was visible beneath his shirt. His voice was steady. "You think your boys got you?" He pulled up his shirt, revealing the deep scar. "1 second," he whispered. "One stab. One life. Gone." The room was silent. Nathan's voice hardened. "Don't let it be yours."